Well, our guest now joining us from Baltimore is DeRay McKesson. He is a Black Lives Matter activist and community organizer joining us from Baltimore. Good morning. Welcome back to the program, Mr. McKesson.
It's good to be back.
So, gosh, where to start? Louisiana, Minnesota, Dallas. What's your reaction, sir, to everything that's been going on, not just this week, but in general in the country?
So remember, we shouldn't have to protest. People shouldn't have to be in the street to be heard, that people protest as a last resort. We know that the police have been inflicting violence in communities for a long time. And it wasn't until we were in the street in Ferguson in 2014 that forced a conversation at the national level about this terror that was happening in communities. What we see in Louisiana, what we see in Minnesota are two black men who should be alive today, but they're not alive because an officer chose to kill them. And when we think about the lack of convictions across the country that have happened at least just in the last 2 years, what we know to be true is that the courts are not saying that the officers were not involved in the death of these people. The courts are saying that their involvement is not criminal. And that reminds us that we need to make sure that the laws, the policies, and practices actually hold police accountable, because the police have incredible power to take people's lives, but they also operate with impunity, and they just aren't held accountable by any of our structures. And these cases remind us that that's not okay. And, you know, my heart goes out to the victims of all violence when we think about what has happened over the past 48 hours.
Our guest will be with us for a half hour. The rest of the program, we'll put the numbers on the bottom of the screen and get to your calls for DeRay McKesson in just a moment or two. A little bit of confusion, Mr. McKesson, overnight about what kind of protest this was. Some were calling it a Black Lives Matter protest. Some were saying it wasn't, that the organization doesn't even have a branch or anything in Dallas. A, does that matter? And B, can you clarify anything for us?
Yeah, so two important things. So the movement is bigger than any one organization. So what's confusing about this moment is that there is an organization that has a name that is the same thing as how we call the movement. So when people think about this moment, they talk about the Black Lives Matter movement, which is more expansive than any one person or any one organization. And then there is an organization called Black Lives Matter. The organization didn't start the protest, but it is one of the organizations that is around the country. But there's so many incredible activists and organizers that are pushing to make the world more equitable and just. When we think about the protests that have happened in Dallas, that were in Minneapolis, that were in Baton Rouge, is that it's at its root people coming together saying, we know the world can be better, and here's how, and let me find other people who believe it with me.
Let's get right to the phones for our guest. David is calling from Swainsboro, Georgia. You're on the line with DeRay McKesson of Black Lives Matter. Good morning.
Good morning, y'all. C-SPAN. DeRay, how you doing? DeRay, I'm going to throw a little bit of history at you. You know, y'all are listening to politicians and talking like politicians. Please quit it, because as Americans, we need to speak as Americans. What is going on in our country is fascism, plain and simple. It's age-old, been going on forever. They call the people over there in the Persian world radical Muslims. Sir, it was started by Khorazzani at the end of World War II when he set up a fascist state in Egypt, and it's moved up into the Middle East. That is the plain and simple of it. And until, like what y'all are doing with Black Lives Matter, point out that it is fascism and that the good people of our world have to say enough and crush it and quit teaching it to our children, this is going to continue. DeRay, I hope you can do something that will change what's going on, and I wish you all the luck in the world.
Let's hear from our guest.
I appreciate it. I appreciate it. You know, what's real is that there's a terror happening by the police and communities across the country. You can call it fascism. You can call it, dictatorship by badge. You can call it a host of things. The outcomes are the same no matter what we call it at this point, is that black people are being disproportionately killed by the police. The police have killed nearly 3 people every day in 2016. The police in 2015 killed somebody every day, but 18 days in all states. So there's a crisis. I'm open to thinking about what we call it.
What are your expectations? We want police to be held accountable. Moving forward, what actions do you expect to come from this? What's realistic in your view right now?
So in a framing perspective, we believe that we can change structures and systems in ways that change culture. What we know to be true is that the culture of policing is broken, that the culture is a culture that says that officers can do what they want and they just won't be held accountable. And that's not okay. So we think about things ranging from police union contracts. So you think about in Louisiana, the Bill of Rights says that officers don't have to give a statement for administrative hearings for 30 days, right? There's no civilian, there's no other public servant that gets 30 days before they have to appear before police to be interrogated. So there are a host of those things. Even with Freddie Gray, when Freddie got killed, the police didn't have to give a statement for 10 days. That is unfair protections that the police have. And then ranging to things like body cameras, to independent investigators, to independent prosecutors. So there's a range of things that we're calling for. And we launched a website, joincampaignzero.org, with the understanding that we can actually map out the policy prescriptions at the local, state, and federal level. In this moment, what I'm hopeful will come forward from the Obama administration and will also be included in the Democratic Convention platform is a call for a national use of force standard that both explicitly calls for the preservation of life and then also makes deadly force the use of last resort.
Natalie, calling from Pompano Beach, Florida, Democratic caller. Hey, Natalie.
Good morning. Good morning. Hi, DeRay.
Yes, you're on the air.
Yep.
I am very, very upset at what's going on, but the problem is we as brown people, Hebrew Israelites, not niggers, not blacks, need to learn who we are and stop trying to, how can I say, govern the law, because God gave us the law at the Red Sea. He gave us the law. So we know the law, the Ten Commandments, thou shalt kill and steal. Stop trying to deal with these people, and that is Caucasian people, okay? Because they're not going to do right by us. They want to destroy us for 400 years. They've been trying to kill us, and that's what they're doing, okay? We need to turn back to God's laws, and the Lord will protect us, the Almighty, the Great One. Because we are His chosen people. Don't be mad about it. And stop killing our men.
That was Natalie DeRay McKesson.
Yeah, so we are people who have made a way out of no way. And like you know, we exist in a legacy of struggle because this country has not been kind to black people since its beginning. We have always been people who have had to push and press because of racism and because of systemic injustice. So that is real. What we also believe to be true is that this is our country too. That we have the power to change laws, to change policies and practices that force the systems and structures to respond to our lives differently. I think what we've seen definitely since August of 2014 is a different type of mobilizing, a different type of organizing amongst black people, and also people building coalitions to say we can make this world a better place. And I firmly believe that. And it's important that we continue to note that this, at the root of all of this, is white privilege, white supremacy, and racism, that we have to be able to talk about the way that race has informed so many things in our country because it is so traumatic and it has real outcomes.
A little bit about yourself and your group, DeRay McKesson. Ponzi at Twitter wants to know, are you a leader of Black Lives Matter? How was he chosen to speak for the people of Ferguson? Beginnings matter, he writes. First of all, your position within the group, can you explain to us?
Yeah, so there's so many people leading across the country, and that's really powerful. So there is no one leader or two leader or three leaders of the movement. There are people leading at the local, state, and national level, and that's really important. I'm one of many people doing work in this space to make sure that we have an equitable and just society. So one of the specific projects that we launched is around Campaign Zero. I, like many people, was also in the street in Ferguson and using social media and using our bodies as a way to push back on dominant culture narratives. And what's important about this moment, as you continue to see, is that so many people are now a part of the conversation and are speaking out and have their voices heard in ways that they had not before.
There's a Washington Post story, you've probably seen it recently, and the headline says, with police killings back in the headlines, Americans remain uncertain about Black Lives Matter. They say that the two fatal police shootings in less than 48 hours in Louisiana and Minnesota have reignited long-running tensions over police and race, and at the center of it all will be the Black Lives Matter movement. But the piece says Americans are still trying to figure out how they feel about it. Over the course of its existence, they write, Black Lives Matter has become a polarizing and often contentious political movement. Opponents say, accuse it of fomenting violence and being anti-police. Supporters say it's a long overdue reaction to disparate treatment of black people by law enforcement. How would you describe yourself, Mr. McKesson?
Yep, so I'm mindful that the movement is young, that this is an old fight, but this iteration of people coming into the street, people organizing, especially young people, and saying we can do something about it, that this is a relatively young space. I also know that there are misconceptions about the movement, and I know that there are incredible people across the country doing really good work to press systems and structures. The changes that will actually result in the police being held accountable are really local. That this is about cities and states passing legislation, passing policies, and changing practices in ways that will make communities safer. It's also about having a different mind shift around what safety means. And if I ask you where you feel the most safe, you're probably not going to tell me in a room full of police. You're probably going to tell me where there are people who love you, where there's food and shelter. And then the question becomes, how do we scale that understanding of safety? But again, this is slow work. Issues of race have always been tense in this country. You know, people still look back on slavery and other injustices and don't actually do a full accounting of the trauma that they've inflicted on communities. So it is no surprise that people in this moment are afraid and uncomfortable when we talk about race, but we must. Have
you met with the presidential candidates this year?
Yep, so I met with President Obama in February, but also met with Hillary and Bernie prior to those meetings. I think that Bernie has come a long way in his understanding of racial injustice. He had already had a deep understanding of economic injustice. And Hillary, has a long time in this work as a politician, to working with communities of color or being lobbied or protested by communities of color, her and her husband. I think that her platform has been is broad in a way. I am hopeful that her platform and the Democratic Convention platform will include two things that it does not right now. One is a call for a national use of force standard, and the other that Hillary said to me when we spoke was that she believes in communities having oversight of the functions in communities, and that actually doesn't come across in her platform or the Democratic Convention platform, which worries me.
Back to calls. Lawrence, Elk Grove Village, Illinois, Republican. Thank you for waiting.
Yeah, I just have a few questions. I was listening to the earlier segment concerning the police officers that were shot, 5 of them, and then are killed actually, and then 12 that were shot total. Do we know the race of those people? Because I didn't see all the reports, so I don't know. The 4 people that were the terrorists or the murderers, do we know? I know one was killed himself, and the other 3, one being a woman. Do we know the race of those people? Did I miss something? I'm just curious, and then I'll have a comment after that.
Haven't seen that in some of the early reporting. I'm not sure if our guest knows, and curious as to why you're asking,
Nope,
and then make your comment, Lawrence.
Well, because I'm curious as to why most of the callers, not all of them, a few of them that called in earlier had actual facts that they were talking about. Mm-hmm. But I'm wondering why all the people that have spoken aren't very wealthy, because they seem to all be clairvoyant about the issues that they don't even know about. Even concerning the shooting of the man in Minnesota in his car, I'm confused on that issue too, because the only video that we have is from the girlfriend of the man who was shot after the man was shot. So I'm curious as to, no questions have been asked about what happened before that. Apparently he was stopped for, I believe, a taillight being out. So I don't even understand how any of this happened until we know what happened.
All right, Lawrence, let's get back to our guest. Anything to respond to there, DeRay McKesson?
What we know to be true is that Alton, for instance, was killed and he was not posing a threat to the officer. What we believe to be true about Philando is that he was not posing a threat to the officer either, that the officer in the video that we saw was still pointing a gun at him when he was immobilized, that still considered him a grave threat when he physically could not move. And that, I do think that that speaks to the mind of the officer and the mindset in terms of seeing black bodies as threatening even when they are immobilized, because he just shot him in point blank range. So we do have questions outstanding, but again, both of these men should be alive, and I think that we all can agree on that.
The caller and several callers and pieces this morning, DeRay McKesson, spoke about social media, its strength, its power these days. What's your reaction to what's your take on the role of social media? And then broaden it out to media in general, because we did have a caller earlier today who said a lot of this is created by the media, it is fueled by the media, and that's part of the problem. What do you think?
Yeah, you know, we've always faced black people, we've always faced these issues of erasure. And erasure often manifests in two ways. One is that either the story is never told or is told by everybody but us. And in these moments, we become the unerased. Literally, social media has allowed people, Twitter and Facebook has allowed people to tell their own stories unfiltered by any other source. So in both of these cases, one a cell phone video, one a Facebook Live video, we see people able to push these videos out and to have them exposed to audiences that they otherwise would not be able to if we didn't have these tools. And that's incredibly powerful. It was powerful for us in Ferguson. It has been powerful in Minneapolis and in Baltimore, for the activists in Chicago and cities across the country. When we think about the media in general, what we see now is the media actually asking the police questions and pushing on the police in ways that we have not seen before. So I think about in Ferguson and since, we see a much more critical media perspective on the actions of the police, holding them accountable both in print, holding them accountable at press conferences. And I think that that has actually changed how people understand the role of the police. There was a point where the police could just do no wrong in any capacity, that if the police said it, it must be true. And now we have a press corps that's much more critical, and I think that that is actually in the interest of the public.
We have Marion on the line from Chicago, Democratic caller. Good morning to you.
Yeah.
You're on the air. Marion?
Hello?
Yes, Marion.
Yes.
Go ahead.
I wanted to say I'm so glad that this young man is on talking about this, and I want to say that I hope that they keep the group going of white people, black people, everybody. When I look at the news and I see a police shooting at a car where a mother is fleeing with her 5 kids, it hurts me and it makes me angry. When I see police beating up black women, sitting on black little girls for 14 years old, when I see a police point a gun in a car where the man is already shot and the police hand is shaking, he shouldn't be a policeman. There's something very wrong, and I hope he keeps up the work to straighten out everything in this country. Thank you.
Thanks for calling. Mr. McKesson, any reaction?
Yeah, so I agree with everything that caller said, and what is also real is that these officers are choosing to inflict this harm. That one of the instances she talked about was in McKinney, when the officer sat on the young girl's back, is that the officer chose to do that. The officers chose to kill Alton and Freddie Gray, and they chose to kill Rakia and all of these other unarmed citizens and all of these other black and brown people. And the officers could make a different choice, but they know that if they make these choices around death and murder, that they will be protected at all costs. And that highlights that we have a real problem in this society and we have to work on it.
Steve from Hughesville, Maryland, independent caller for DeRay McKesson. Good morning, Steve.
Good morning. I just had one comment, but since I've been listening to your guest, I have a few more.
Okay.
First of all, he just brought up Freddie Gray, and I believe he said the police wanted to kill Freddie Gray. I live in Maryland. I follow the news in Baltimore. Every policeman that's been put on trial so far has been found not guilty or insufficient evidence or whatever. So that is an incorrect statement. Second thing I want to say is that people need to be taught how to deal with the police. I'm a middle-aged white man, and I feel insulted when the police walk up to my car with their hands on their pistols. But I'm smart enough to keep my hands on the steering wheel and say, officer, I'm going to reach into the glove box now and get my driver's license. That goes back to Michael Brown. If Michael Brown had followed what the policeman's orders were, he wouldn't have been killed by the police. But also, in that instance, the policeman was found not guilty too. Also, I want to address white privilege. Please don't tell me about white privilege, sir. I grew up in Prince George's County, Maryland, in southeast Washington, and where it was 50-50 black, 50-50 white. I get up every morning, I go to work at 4:15. I work 12 hours a day, 5 days a week. Thank God I'm off today. And I work 5 hours a day on Saturdays and Sundays to have what I have, okay? Nobody's giving me anything. I have black men that are right beside me that own the same businesses that I do or are just as successful as me. It's because we work. It has nothing to do with any privilege on my part. And that's all I have to say. Thank you very much.
All right, let's get a reaction from our guest in Baltimore.
Yeah, so the first thing about Freddie Gray, and like I said, that the officers are making a choice, I stand by that. The officers chose not to seatbelt him. The officers chose to ignore any medical call for help that he gave, that was a choice. And what we know to be true is that when Freddie got into the van, his spine was okay, that he was alive. When he got out, his spine felt like a bag of rocks, is what the report says. So again, officers chose to do actions that led to Freddie's death, and that is real. When we think about Mike Brown that you brought up, I don't believe that people should die for jaywalking. And Mike was at best jaywalking. And we live in a country where the officers have incredible power and can do whatever they want. And they are just, that's deemed okay. And that happened with Mike Brown, and that happened in a lot of other cases. So when you tell me that the officers were not convicted, that is not a sign that the officers did nothing wrong. It's a sign that our laws actually protect anything that they do. So what we need to do is actually make sure that the laws and policies and practices hold people accountable. Just because they were acquitted does not mean that there was no wrongdoing. It means that the wrongdoing wasn't found criminal, again, because we have a shadow justice system for the police. And then when we think about white privilege, it disappoints me that you have such a deep misunderstanding of the history of race and racism in this country. Your white skin affords you a set of privileges and benefits more than any other person in this country. And there's a legacy of racism that is so deeply embedded. So when you think about what white privilege is, it's a set of benefits that extend to you regardless of gender and income, because of your whiteness. So we think about little things like Band-Aids, and we think about what skin tone looks like on products, like that is white, that is normative. And then when we think about in a larger sense that we treat whiteness as it is the defining attribute of what it means to be normal in this country. So yes, you do work hard. You working hard in no way means that white privilege doesn't exist. It no way means that if two people apply for the same job that they won't be treated differently. It won't mean that you probably have access, or generally white people have access to institutional wealth in ways that people of color do not. And that is not because black people didn't work hard. People have worked hard for centuries. People worked and were not compensated for their labor. But again, because of the way whiteness is functioned in this society, there's an immense privilege afforded to white people.
Just about 10 minutes left with our guest, DeRay McKesson, who is up in Baltimore. He's a community organizer and a Black Lives Matter activist. Frank is calling from Houston, Texas, Republican. Hey, Frank.
Yes, good morning, and thank you for taking my call.
You bet.
First of all, I want to give my heart out to the families of the officers and the officers that were killed in Dallas. I would like to say the last caller was spot on. Black Lives Matter movement grew out of the frustration that was fanned by the media to get convictions on men, officers that were doing what they should have done. Not so much with the Zimmerman, but the rest of them. There were no convictions. They were tried by a jury of their peers. They were leaned on by the Department of Justice. They were leaned on by the President of the United States. Black Lives Matter movement is a frustrated fascist movement. You go around disrupting demonstrations. You, being a community organizer, should know that when you let the media fan the flames, you say you know the man was shot and killed in Louisiana, but you don't have any evidence of that. You're going by what the woman said. Let the facts come in. Let the trial be held. Then do your protesting. Thank you.
Frank began by calling your group a frustrated fascist movement. What's your reaction?
The bar, it's always interesting, right? So what he said is that because the officers have not been convicted, essentially they must have been in the right. And I think back on a history and legacy of racism in this country, and there were very few convictions for lynching. They weren't right to lynch people, though. Just because they weren't convicted in no way means that they were right. What it highlights is that the laws are racist and protect a set of people in ways that are unfair. And when I think about the police, it is a similar circumstance, that the laws are saying that the police, no judge has said the police were not involved in any capacity in these people's death. The judges have said that the police's involvement is not criminal. And that is because we have a system that just protects the police at all costs. And that isn't okay. So again, the acquittals don't push me to think that the officers had no culpability. It's about a broken system, and we need to fix the system. And in terms of him sort of suggesting that we are jumping to conclusions, I'll never accept that Mike Brown should be dead. I'll never accept that Freddie Gray should be dead or Tamir Rice, that they shouldn't be dead. We have evidence time and time again where the officers choose not to kill white people who point guns at them, who hold hostages, who do really grievous things. But we see a 12-year-old boy in Cleveland get killed just standing still with a toy gun. That officers are choosing to do this time and time again, and to ignore the racist element of this is to just live in a wonderland.
So we read, Mr. McKesson, about several dozen laws that are out there these days to address police violence, many being considered, some have passed. Is there one piece of legislation that you can point to out there that you think might make a significant difference moving forward?
So President Obama right now could sign an executive order, or the Congress could push through legislation around a national use of force standard. And at the national level, that would actually have a demonstrative impact if we had a standard that highlighted the preservation of life and using deadly force as a last resort. You think about places like Baltimore, it was until very recently, like the last 2 weeks, it was okay to hog tie and chokehold people. It just wasn't against the rules. And that is true in cities across the country, and that's just not okay. Or you think about police union contracts where, like in Chicago, the officers' files are automatically destroyed in, every 2 or so years. Their discipline files, like negative discipline, and that just doesn't make sense. It's not a system designed to hold officers accountable. But if I had to choose one executive action or legislation, it would be around a use of force standard that was really robust and that explicitly called for the preservation of life, and deadly force is a last resort.
We have time for a couple more calls with our guest. Sean is calling from Englewood, Ohio, Democratic caller. Hey, Sean.
Hello.
Good morning.
First off, I'd like to say, sir, you are a racist. And that's point blank, flat out simple. You are nothing but a racist.
Sean, let me jump in and ask you why you're saying that.
Well, I have worked in the urban setting for the last 20 years of my life. I am disabled now. These police have a split-second decision to think over 10,000 things of what they're going to do in that split-second decision. Sir, have you ever been placed in that situation where you have a split-second decision to think of over 10,000 things that you're going to do? And have you ever been put in the situation where you have to make that decision whether you're going to take somebody's life?
Sean, let me jump in and get a response from our guest.
Yeah, so I would ask you, have you ever been a doctor?
Sean,
actually, I've worked in the medical field for 17 years.
Doing what?
So have you been a doctor though? Have you been a doctor? A doctor?
Are you a doctor?
Have you been a doctor, Sean? No, I'm asking you. I'm trying to work through this document. Again, so you are unwilling to even have a conversation because you know your argument is faulty. So you've not been a doctor before, but I'm sure that when you go to the doctor's office, you have a set of expectations about how your doctor functions. And I think of it as the same thing. I've not been a police officer, but I do have expectations about how people who have the power to kill function in a society. And they are public servants, and it is the public's right to say how the job should function. It's disappointing that you offer a set of opinions and you are unwilling to be challenged on them, and I would push you to think deeper about the thoughts that you put out into the world and to reflect on your arguments as you construct them and put them out publicly.
Sean, anything else?
You see, bam.
Sorry? Sean, are you still there?
Yes, I'm still here.
Go ahead and finish up.
I challenge that sir to go take a police exam and work those streets. Then
Again, you're deflecting.
Do what?
No, you're deflecting. I don't have anything else to say. Your argument fell apart and you are now trying to put it back together, but it's fallen. So, I appreciate your call and I hope that you reflect on the way you construct arguments and present them in public.
From NBC in Chicago, here's a tweet about Dallas. DeRay McKesson, suspect in Dallas, stated he, quote, wanted to kill white people before being killed by a detonated bomb. This from the police chief. Any reaction from you?
No, at this point about Dallas, I have more questions than answers. And we have gone through these cycles before where something happens in the media and most of the information that comes out in the immediate aftermath is just incorrect. So I'm holding off until I know more information before I make statements. It is important to note, though, that the protest in Dallas was over when this began. The media has been reporting this as happening during the protest, and that simply isn't true. I spoke last night to the people who put together the protest in Dallas, and I know what is true and what is not about when these shootings happened.
Let's go to Carl, Thomaston, Alabama, Democrat. Hi, Carl.
Yeah, how are you, sir? I would like to say good morning to DeRay. I would just like to say that when the shootings happened in Minnesota and down in Louisiana, I would like to know where were the Republican senators and congressmen? They did not come out and make any statement of any kind. And as soon as the tragedy happened over in Dallas, now they're all tweeting, they're all making statements. So it kind of goes to show that there is a we versus them or us versus the police mentality. And we all know how much Donald Trump likes to run his big mouth. And he was mom during the first two shootings. And as soon as the one happened in Dallas yesterday morning, that's the first something he does, come out and makes a statement. So, and another something, the laws really need to be changed because that is a very high bar. Anytime a police officer is involved in a shooting, the first defense that they're going to offer is, I felt threatened, I felt for my life. And I just think that, we see that happen too often. In all of these shootings, that's the first defense of the officer. I felt threatened, or I felt for my safety or for my life. And I just think that those laws need to be changed.
Let's get a final thought from our guest, DeRay McKesson.
Yeah, so I would wholeheartedly agree with you that the laws need to be changed and that these situations highlight the fact that the laws just protect the police at all costs, and that's not okay. And I also agree with you that what we see as lawmakers selectively choosing when to speak out about things is that they saw these videos, that they've seen the videos at least since 2014, and we haven't seen people like Trump or a whole set of Republicans even acknowledge that the trauma is happening. And again, I think that this lack of acknowledgement goes with people's deep discomfort with talking about race and also with holding police officers accountable, that for so long the police have been a group of public servants that have just been able to do whatever they want to do